Blue?
Anytime?
Live?
Okay. Hello, it's Blue Orange 22. Sorry about that, folks. This is the week. Okay. Hello, it's Blue Orange 22. Sorry about that, folks. This is the weekly Friday voice discussion of the Men's Human Rights Discord. We run the Men Are Human website. We're the semi-official Discord of the Men's Rights subreddit. This week's topic is divorce court and alimony court and family court, and how it is very often very unfair to men. And it's a very corrupt system that is ruining lives and breaking apart families. I have two links in the voice discussion. You can see the first one is a New York Times link, which I've archived because I don't want to support the New York Times. But it says skip child support, go to jail, lose job, repeat. This happens a lot where men are given child support payments, but then they get arrested because they can't afford it, and they go to jail. And then they get out of jail, and now they're even more behind on their child support payments, and they can't get a job because now they have a record, and so they go to jail again. It's a very scary trap you can get into where you're essentially forced into prison, even if you're trying to do the right thing. And it's essentially debtor's prison. Men going to jail because they can't afford child support. Now, I'm not against the concept of child support, but what I am against, and what we are against, and what we want to give attention to, is unreasonable child support. Child support that's just not possible to pay. In addition to that, men's rights activists would argue that in many, many cases, fathers are unfairly separated from their children. Yes, abusive fathers do exist, but abusive mothers exist as well. And a child support or a custody court system should be fair and gender neutral. You'll see below, when it comes to alimony, Florida has something called permanent alimony. And if you see the headline, wife of man paying alimony despite advanced Alzheimer's among those pushing, the headline continues. Basically what it is, a 72-year-old man was ordered to pay permanent alimony, lifetime alimony. In Florida, what that means is you're ordered to pay alimony for the rest of your life. Even if you get divorced when you're 40 years old, when you're 80 years old, you will still have to pay alimony. And they will take it out of your Social Security, out of your pensions, any way they can. And this man, 72 years old, has advanced Alzheimer's. The divorce was over a decade ago, and yet he can't get adequate medical care because he is forced to pay permanent alimony, regardless of the fact that his ex-wife got remarried. It's a very corrupt system. I'm sure almost every person here has some experience, or at least they know someone that's been through it, or they've heard a story about it. So I'm now going to open up the voice discussion, the voice text channel. Please pay attention to the text channel. It's often just as lively as the main chat. Some people consider it the main event of the weekly chats, actually. So if you guys can dig up stories, articles about this happening, I'm sure there's a ton. It is worth noting one thing, that second link about the wife of the man paying alimony despite Alzheimer's. This was during, I think it was 2012. It was an effort to try and change the law and make it more gender neutral and more fair. But the National Organization for Women, a feminist group, stepped in and protested. So people wonder, why are we sometimes anti-feminists? Because there are times when feminist organizations directly fight against equality, and that was one of them. So anyway, take it away. Anyone has a story or experience with this? I'm sure there's lots. And just to note, absolutely, it is not only men who are affected. It is not only men who are affected. I've heard stories of women too being affected. So that's our topic.
I've never.
I don't.
Sorry.
Go on, Natalie.
So personally, I have never dealt with divorce or alimony or anything, but I do find that people use alimony as definitely an excuse to just get more money, and it's absurd. Honestly, it's terrible, and it's usually the man paying the money, and it's terrible. But I don't know. I think it depends how much you're paying and how long you're paying. I definitely think alimony should be paid to be able to support the other person and make sure they're able to get on their feet, but it shouldn't be for that long. That sounds terrible. That sounds absolutely terrible to have to pay for someone you're not even with anymore for that long, and that's my 2 cents on it. So should be to a certain extent and a certain amount of money, in my opinion.
Why do you think someone should have to support another adult? Since neither of us have mentioned children in this case.
So, my opinion on that would probably if there's no kids involved, no child support at all, and it's just a couple that's getting divorced, let's say the main income is from the man. The man also maybe even gets the house. So, let's say the woman has to go get a house, maybe well, not even get a house, get an apartment, find a maybe a new job or whatever if she doesn't have a job, and I feel like, yeah, maybe she should get a little bit support if she's not getting any. I mean, it's gonna be much more difficult to get on your feet. Um, I mean, the same goes for if it's a woman supporting a man. I mean, I wouldn't wanna be kicked out of a house, and then it's like, "Oh god, what do I do now? My main income was my spouse, and now it's."
Guys. I had no idea what you just said. Either of you.
I'll just say very quickly, to that point though, more commonly it's the woman that gets the house, not the man.
So, this is my personal experience. Obviously, not this happen doesn't happen to everyone, but my mom actually didn't get the house, but the reason wasn't because, um, like, because she was a woman or anything, but it was because she couldn't afford the house. So, because since my dad was the main income, she couldn't even stay in the house, so she was like, "Well, I have to move out anyways." So,
And
my
I will
dad got
say,
the house.
I will also, to be completely fair, point out I do know a woman who got divorced and the man got the house and she didn't, and it was very unfair. So I do recognize it does happen both ways, but the majority of cases, it's the woman that gets the house.
Oh, most definitely, and I think that's totally
Yeah, that's
irrational
true.
and terrible, but I mean, sometimes the woman either can or can't afford the house, and sometimes the woman can afford the house, and it's like, I don't know, they should just be more gender neutral and not biased towards women because they're weak and all innocent, so, you
Yeah,
know.
you didn't answer the original question though. Why do you think why should one adult support another just because they have been previously in a relationship? I just heard you restating your opinion, not answering the actual question.
I said because, if you're being kicked out of a house, say you are being kicked out of the house, you're gonna have to find a place to stay, place to get food, maybe even a job. And it's not easy if you are not the main income for the 2 working together. You just lost, like, your main income if you are the main income or not. So it might probably be harder to get back on your feet. So
But if you're an adult, wouldn't that be in your own responsibility?
oh, most definitely. But I mean, you're still getting kicked out, you're still losing stuff. I mean, you can keep the house, but that means you have to still pay that house by yourself. You're not paying this house together, you're not paying the bills together, and if you aren't the main income, that's gonna be a big struggle. So I think for maybe, like, I don't even not even the first year, I don't even think it should take that long because, people can be lazy sometimes. So, I think you should be at least
I
able to
would
pay a little
say,
bit.
I would say it would depends on what the woman was doing during the relationship. If she can demonstrate that she was actively sacrificing her career and in order to do whatever it was she was doing, then I would agree. But if there are no children involved and you just chose to stay home and be a homemaker, I'm sorry, I was living alone in an apartment and I did 100% of my domestic labor every single day. And nothing about that is even remotely close to the same thing as having a job. So,
Oh,
I was
I
in,
mean,
yeah. So if you're just kind of lounging around at home while the man goes to work and you're just going to the movies and having lunch with friends, then I'm sorry, but it was on you to get a career and a job and savings. If it's a mother who's staying home to take care of kids, I get that 100%. And she quit her job to look after the children, absolutely fair enough. But if there are no children involved, I really kind of have to question what did you contribute to the relationship to deserve alimony? Because
percent agree with Jay and Kate about that we should be able if the man is being abused by the woman, sexually, physically, emotionally, whatever the case is, why would we be giving money to her? That sounds absolutely terrible. It's like giving money to a rapist. It's like, no, you're not gonna do that. And in my opinion, I'm like, well, it's hard because the court system favors the woman. So if the woman says, no, I've never abused sexually, physically, emotionally to him, then that can get tricky. And how are you going to, how now the man has to stick up for himself, tell him, no, she is. But not everyone will believe him, which is very unfortunate and gets complicated.
This is the reason why we need to make all laws in regards to this gender neutral and presumption of innocence gender neutral, because currently the presumption of innocence in family court is gendered, which is a problem, and that needs to change. So that the presumption, if someone says, no, she was being abusive or he was being abusive, right? They say like, okay, they say like, do you have proof? And then if you don't have proof, if you can't like, right? Because what happens if you are being abusive, right? And you know you're being abusive, right? You might not want to, get a hit. So therefore, if your spouse or your decides to divorce you, right, because you're being abusive, right, and they say like, okay, I'm going to then the victim, right, he or she might say, I'm not going to say that would be able to get out of alimony if they could prove it, right? But if they but also if they didn't have proof, like, okay, do you really want accusation on you, right? And the potential of being, prosecuted for domestic violence. No. So that means that if we say person A abused spouse B, spouse B wanted the divorce, right? And then spouse A said no, because then I need to alimony. And then spouse B said, okay, then I'm going to say that you abused me because you did, right? Then A might use the abusive part. In this case, A might just say, okay, I agree to a divorce without alimony, right? Does that make sense?
It does.
Good. I wasn't clear. I didn't know if I was being clear because my explanation was a bit murky. But it's good that I was.
I think that we have to kind of narrow down a couple things. Like, okay, so there's some I think there's some wiggle room there when somebody's just splitting off from a marriage or legal relationship and they don't have a dime in their pocket. I think very short term, a couple things can be agreed upon. But I think the point that was raised before about the 72-year-old man, which is legal alimony, either for an extended period of time in your life or the rest of your life. There is no way, if a relationship is broke off in an equal society, that you should be paying for an other adult to live. It's just wrong. I don't care if it's, we know it's mostly men that are paying, but like we said, it's some women too. It's just wrong. You can't say that's an equal society after somebody breaks up from you. You're no longer married or legally obligated for anything, and you've got to support them for the rest of their lives.
Exactly.
But we touched on kids. What's that?
Oh yeah, I always wanted to add to that is wrong, and that's the reason why, if you are a homemaker and you don't really earn a living, right? I think that man or woman should be allowed alimony if they didn't do anything wrong, right? But if they do anything wrong, they don't. But if they did not something wrong, if they didn't do anything wrong, they should be owed alimony, but only for the time that they were married, for example. So, like, for example, let's say that you got married at 25. And then you basically stay together until you were 32, and then you got a divorce. That means that, okay, you did, and then you calculate the time that you didn't, work, you didn't earn a living, right? And then you'd be able to pay alimony from a fraction of your income, but not most of it, right? And now for the time that you were married, right? Until he or she gets remarried or get a job, right? That pay, right? So therefore, you only that time period that you were married, right? And if the person paying child support, if he or she get a lower job, that means that, okay, your job, you have lost money now, you have lower salary. That means that your alimony is also going to decrease because of that. Because if they were married, the standard of living of the person who they divorced from would anyway go down, because they would have less money if they stayed married.
Yeah, to finish my point though, I don't really think that works, because you're opening up a can of worms of proving everything, just like Kate said. I don't think either system is perfect, but proving that abuse, making sure, I mean, you could be could be being rewarded for a lie in court just because they believe you. That's the drawback with no fault divorce, is proving everything, just like Kate said. But what I really wanted to go on, touch on, because we're talking about shared parenting and children too, because we touched on that. This is another major part of it. I vehemently disagree with that statement when people say, because it's what's behind the statement, not the literal statement. I vehemently disagree when people say, well, real dads pay child support. No, real dads should be in their kids' lives, and that's what a real dad wants. They don't want to have to pay child support because they want to be in their lives. So shared parenting eliminates that. Both the couples are contributing to raising the child, whether they're married or not. So I think the standard should be neither party pays child support unless that's agreed on between the two of them. So I'm all for shared parenting bills as a default. I think that's extremely important. This is what figures into it. I don't think adults should get paid to live from another adult, but the kids are a totally different story. This every other weekend crap that some of my friends are going through, it's very disheartening. It's very depressing, because they're not going to be around for years of their kid's life. Every other weekend means nothing. So that's why I think a default shared parenting bill. And what I mean by default is, if there is actual abuse, then it must be proven. People can't just allege it to get out of a shared parenting bill.
And currently, the abuse is basically just, if it's abuse, if women abuse it, they have to prove it, and if men is accused, and then they are presumption of guilt already. It's a gendered presumption of innocence, and they need to stop, and it need to be an equal presumption of innocence to go to both genders, because
Correct.
now women can just be abused and accuse the man of being abusive, and then he can't prove it other way around, and then that will be considered to be the reality by the court, which is horrific. Especially that men are actually, statistically speaking, less likely to be abusive. Not to mention, I would have to just want to underline that most parents, most men and most women, are not abusive parents. But when it comes to statistics, men are less likely to be abusive, right? So the law, when it comes to that way, it makes no fucking sense. Okay, there does make sense, and that is based in female supremacy and gynocentrism. That's about it. Otherwise, there's no justification for it. There's not even a so-called justification.
I think
we
it's
should probably
interesting-
go through what happens to men in the family courts and why it's such a raw deal for them in the first place, like in a bullet point sort of style, because I think a lot of people don't get it. Thus far, we've spoken as if it was a situation that tilts against men quite a bit, but which women can be victims of too. But I don't think that really encompasses the horror of the stories that I've read and heard from people in this Discord, and like dads in general who have been forced into a situation where the abusive mother gets custody of the kids. They are then forced to go out and work to support her. She gets basically everything that he makes that doesn't go to his rent. And they can actually set your child support so high that you can't actually pay it, and they can set your child support at a high level, and then you can lose your job or get injured or something like that, and they won't lower it down to a lower level, so you're stuck on the higher level of child support that you can't meet, and they can basically screw you over by just accepting that her accusations of abuse. It's been called the silver bullet, the accusations, because they're one of the best ways to wreck a man's credibility in court, and they seem to be almost automatically believed from what I've seen, although it's very hard to tell because the courts themselves are secretive, and it's almost impossible to speak up about them without being arrested.
Yes. The family court system, whenever it comes to divorce, more specifically, whenever it comes to like children, I think it definitely finds a way to corrupt the guy's character a lot more than it does. Not necessarily a lot more, but they do a pretty good job of trying to corrupt the guy's character in the family court system whenever it comes to.
Yeah, we've got video.
Yeah.
We've got video of I think it was a chief prosecutor, basically telling a bunch of trainee lawyers. I'm not sure what the titles are, but basically telling a bunch of trainee family court lawyers that if they file a accusation of abuse with her office, they will sit on the accusation of abuse until the trial is over and then reject it. That way, throughout the trial, it's treated as if it has, it's been proven. So, or at least it's treated as if it's very credible. And so the decision is made based on the idea that it's credible.
Yeah, I posted that several times. She was legally standing up and said, use the protection order. She was telling them to do that. And that's, I think, what is a little bit frustrating about it is that we are basically, the general public is ignorant, that haven't been through it, and they're very credulous, and they'll look at you and they'll go, I mean, this is how deep the ignorance goes. An attorney can't do that. They can't legally do that. They can't tell you to perjure yourself by filing a fake protection order. Yes, they can. They do it all the time. They don't directly say that to you, but it's heavily implied. And people don't get that. They actually think that's why people can't file fake protection orders. They actually believe that you can't file a fake protection order. Because
they do that. I think they do that as like a just in case sort of thing. Just in case, the thing, like the divorce doesn't go into like her favor. So that way she always gets something, because they think, a lot of the times they think that women are weak and they're incapable of doing things for themselves. And that's not good. Believe it or not, it's actually bad for both parties. It's bad for both parties. It really is, because
it's totally bad for both parties.
Because it damages the woman's self-confidence. It damages her ability to, be able to provide for herself and actually be independent, like the feminists claim, like they want to be. It completely dissolves that when you do that.
And this was, if you guys saw my recent video about showing respect to feminists, and then the honey badgers kind of didn't like it and kind of took it apart. Here's an example. This issue is an example of what I mean. There's a lot of people who walk around calling themselves feminists who would agree. And actually, I've seen on some feminist subreddits, they dislike the female dating strategy subreddit. Not all, I should say. But feminist organizations, such as NOW, the National Organization for Women, almost always support unequal and unfair laws that are unfair to men. And these are the organizations that have real political influence. These are the organizations that can make headlines and can affect decisions that governors and representatives make. So when we say that we blame feminists for this issue, or partly blame, not partially blame feminists, I should say, partially blame feminists for this issue, if you're the coffee shop feminist listening to this and you're saying, well, I don't feel that way, sure, I believe you. But you need to look at what these major feminist lobby groups are doing, because they are a big part of the problem, and they are a big reason why these laws are not equal and why these laws were passed in the first place.
Well, I primarily blame them because it used to be that the dads got the kids. And that was by default because the dad was the main earner. Therefore, he was the guy who could support them. And that wasn't fair either. But it was the feminists who changed that system over to the woman gets the default custody. And then ever since, they've been pushing and pushing and pushing to make it worse. And honestly, we've seen this destroy people. We have guys who come in here who've been absolutely wrecked by this system, and they can't even talk about it publicly because if they do, they're in a lot of trouble. And like, we've got guys who've been driven very close to suicide by it. We've got guys who wish they could go and kill their wives because they feel like, this is the only way to stop the abuser, who now has huge amounts of control over their lives because the courts handed it to them. The courts have handed her financial control. They've handed her control over the kids. They've handed her control over his life because she can file a restraining order on him, and then she can go to his front door without his knowledge and call the police and say he's in breach of the order. And from what I've heard, that's actually him being in breach of the order because there's no rules saying that she can't go and talk to him. It's just a flat out, if he gets within X distance of her, he's in breach of the order. So if he accidentally walks down the street and sees her, he's in breach of the order.
Yeah,
So
I've seen Reddit posts about guys who have to go to shops further away from their home because they can't risk going to the same grocery store as the ex, and he doesn't know when he's going to be there or not, so he has to drive out of town to do a shop. I have actually, it's not always that extreme, it's probably usually not that extreme, but that does happen. That's not unheard of.
I'd also like to add something other that is very terrible when it comes to court, is that when a guy is required to pay child support or alimony, right? Usually, if he's married and he gets a lousy job, that means less money, right? But when they're divorced, you basically are guaranteed to get the same amount of income as though he had when they were divorced, when they were married, right? Which is unjustifiable. So basically, what occurred was that people, men, were not, if they got laid off or they had to get a different job, usually because they had to move because they couldn't pay their rent or the mortgage because of because of child support laws, right, or alimony law, right, and that means they couldn't get a same job, and that means that he have to pay more money, right, which means that he can't do that because he doesn't have the same amount of money, accessibility money as he had in the past, which means that it's not possible to pay the required money.
And to go back to the restraining order thing, it's because they are set up with the idea, the childish and naive idea, that no abuser or stalker would go and get one of these orders in order to torment and punish the person they get it against. Like, they're just not set up with the idea that the person getting the order is the problem and the person who the order is against is the victim. And because, the judges will just rubber stamp these things for women. We've had many, many examples of this happening. We've got, I think we've actually got statistics to do with how many of these orders go to women, to the extent that if a man shows up and tries to get one of these orders against his wife, he has to jump through so many hoops to get it that it's unbelievable. Jay Willie, your mic's live.
Oh, sorry.
I wanted
Can I
to go
say something real
back
quick?
Oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I think that I think because of like the so-called like patriarchy or whatever, there's like I call it patriarchal pressure whenever it comes to the family court system. Because
I like that. I'm sorry, but just patriarchal pressure. I like that. That's good.
I like it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then I also call, and this is I'm going to be because we are on live and I'm trying to be as professional as possible when using I call like the family court wavering more like towards women. I call it putang privilege.
Okay.
That is that's what I call it, and so just for a reason. There's a lot of patriarchal pressure whenever it comes to that. And the reason why they have to go through so many hoops is because the family court system is designed for them to essentially designed for them to fail. And I call it bureaucratic BS because it is absolutely horrible and wrong for a guy to have to go through these many hoops just to see their kids. It's a form of abuse. It's toxic. And the family court system is financially abusing men at every turn, whether they want to admit it or not. They are.
And they treat the man as an abuser even if there's no accusation. As soon as the kids are taken away from the man, he automatically becomes suspect if he's trying to get the kids back. It starts to become a thing of, why are you trying to get these kids back? What's your interest in these kids? And you being their dad doesn't really factor into it. I mean, I've heard from people who've got experience of this
because they think that they're pedophile. They either think that they're hitting them, sexually abusing them. They paint men out. They demonize men, and it's horrible.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard from quite a few people that it's basically the case that the man becomes suspect as soon as the proceedings are initiated at this point. And it's just a case of, you're now bothering this woman and you're now bothering her children and you're like a hanger-on, but you've got to pay all this money to her because you put her in this situation. It's all this sort of, how can we construct victimhood around the wife? And it's very, very toxic stuff.
To the point that I had before when we went off on this, and it was important. I'm not saying it wasn't important, but Men Are Human brought up, guys being absolutely devastated via the divorce and family courts with the kids, to where they are on the verge of suicide. Now, here's the thing. There's a lot of speculation. Oh, this is probably why so many men are killing themselves. We have direct evidence that men are offing themselves because of this. And people they don't care enough about it. Are any of you familiar with Thomas Ball? Thomas Ball immolated himself, set himself on fire on the courthouse steps because of all the abuse he received, literally.
And it was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking.
Lit himself on fire. Now, if we as men can't get any empathy when that happens, we've got some real problems in society. And I hate to do a comparison like, if a woman did that, the whole world would have to stop. Okay, that's an exaggeration, but it's kind of true. All right. So the man lit himself on fire in front of the courthouse steps. He didn't do it for fun. All right. And then we've got other guys on video who are crying their eyes out on video that they can't see any way out of their debt problem and being able to support their children. So they're saying goodbye, and the next moment you hear about it, and this is on video. I've got videos. If you want me to post that, I'll be happy to. And the next moment, he goes and kills himself. So there's direct evidence. This is what it's doing to men. But we as a society, and I'm speaking collectively. I know speaking collectively is not always the best thing, but just as a misandrist society, this is even men offing themselves directly because of this stuff isn't getting us enough attention. And
which is an absolute disgrace.
Not even men self flagellating. I mean, like, no, I don't know. It's self putting yourself on fire.
Immolating.
Yes, that's
Immolation.
immolating on TV is not even getting it enough attention, right?
Yeah.
And I also would
I
like
would
to
just
have
like
very,
to say
very,
one
very
thing.
important, very important information that we need to spread, and that is that a lot of men who are from countries in Southern Europe, Africa, or Latin America, when they go to more Western countries, right, then they don't, Anglophone countries, should I say, they don't actually know about these laws being so extremely anti-male, right? So therefore, they get surprised, and I believe that that is one of the reasons why we need to make sure that people know about this, because it's very, very dangerous for those men, because they have no idea what they're getting into. They think marriage is like marriage in the West and not something else, you know?
Don't be banging like a screen door through a hurricane if you're not prepared to deal with the damage that comes from it.
Yeah, but you also need to know that a hurricane is a hurricane and not a and not something that is dangerous. Because what they're
So
coming from, marriage is a good thing. It's just the angle from Western countries, which is bad. Not just, but as an example of what is bad.
So about male suicide rates, I think it's like I think it comes to like a really large collection of factors. So it's the discrimination in the court system, because like we have a lot of suicides in prison. Then it's the discrimination in then it's like the burden of like providing to families, and of course that burden of providing to one's family isn't just making men commit suicide, but like sometimes when that burden is absent from the man, that can also lead to suicide, because if you put as a central role of a man to like provide for someone, but he doesn't have anyone to provide for, then that can be really depressing for some people.
I have depression, and so I know I can only imagine what men's health must be like, and I actually deal with my emotions like a man. I think that's exactly why I get it.
Yeah, and of course it is like there are some aspects of masculinity which do hurt men as well. But of course, I'm referring to toxic masculinity, but I don't like to use that word that much. Yeah, although not in the way. So feminists have a very not. I don't want to generalize feminists, because I do consider myself feminist too. So a lot of feminists tend to view. Some feminists, anyways, they tend to like view toxic masculinity and to discuss it as something that as a problem that is that they need to blame men about, while it is like a social way that men are taught. It's a way that society poisons us through our masculinity, through our taught masculine behaviors. And I think that's the best way to frame like toxic masculinity, not as a blaming thing, but as just a fact, as something that we are taught and it's hurting us.
Yeah, actually, I do have a very example.
Say something, please.
Do you mind if I? Yeah, you can go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Like I just wanted to wait like a long time, cause yeah. So on the topic of toxic masculinity, I think that toxic masculinity is kind of these really unfair expectations that are placed on men that men internalize, and so when they internalize it, it seems very toxic. But if you actually look at it, it's just misandry, So I give you an example. So when you say toxic masculinity is maybe something like, and I've seen this happen, people saying, in Kenya, there's like so much toxic masculinity, So like in Kenya, you'll hear a guy saying men shouldn't celebrate their birthday parties, So like if you hear that, you'll find that it's so bad. But what I find interesting, and I even made a post about this on the subreddit called Left Wing Male Advocates, and you guys can go look at it. because that subreddit is so good. It's much better than the men's rights one, which is very, like, they allow anyone to post, but the men's left-wing one is very, how do I say, it's very moderated, but in a good way, not in a heavy-handed way. So I made a post about it there, and I basically said, if telling a woman not to do something is seen as misogyny, how come telling a guy not to do something is not seen as misandry? You know, because like feminists, they operate from this viewpoint that masculinity in society is seen as good and virtuous, and femininity is seen as evil and inferior. But that's not what I see in reality at all, you know. So that's why I kind of disagree with that hypothesis. And you know, also all the studies I've seen showing that people generally view women as better, you know. So I think it would be, again, this is just my theory, that toxic masculinity is more of internalized misandry rather than, you know, men, you know, acting out in like a patriarchal way or something like that. Because if you actually look at the so-called like patriarchy, if you look at the things that men have to do for women, you know, they include like, you know, working 16 hours a day for women. Like if you go out with a woman and there's a dangerous animal or a murderer, you have to fight that murderer and die, but she doesn't have to, you know. So basically things that are really extreme, you know, they seem almost like, you know, a lot worse than the female gender role, you know. Of course I hate both, but the male gender one seems like too extreme, you know. So I feel like part of this thing of men being unfairly targeted in family courts comes from that societal expectation that a father is only good when he provides something, you know. And this is what you'll see a lot, that, you know, a father, he's there to be, number one, an ATM. Number two, maybe just do some other physical labor for the family, you know. That's his main goal. He won't concern himself with, you know, taking care of the kids. Not that he doesn't want to, but he's not expected to, you know. Now, it is true that feminists usually look at this and say it is an unfair expectation on women. However, it's also an unfair expectation on men if they have to work more hours and they see their children less. You know what I mean? Because, you know, also fathers want to spend time with their children, but they usually can't, you know, and they are even unable to form a bond with their children, you know. The stereotype is usually that the kids can spend time with the mom, tell the mom anything, but to the father is very distant from them, right? So I feel like it comes into play here, right? And it must be said that if you're a feminist and you're listening to this, where we disagree is that I don't believe that this system was created to advantage men. You know, there's nothing advantageous about working more and spending less time with your children. You know, there's nothing advantageous about it. It's not a good thing at all, you know. So, and then also another thing I just wanted to add on the topic of child support, probably one of the most traumatizing examples of this you can see is that boys as young as 13 who are victims of rape by women who are much older are still ordered to pay child support. And even not just in Western countries, even in places like Afghanistan and Africa, where boys, underage boys, are sometimes married to older women, they're still expected to do the majority of they're expected to bring the majority of the income into the family, right? So that means that, you know, you can look this up. Actually, a big number, 60% of child laborers are male, and 66% of those doing extreme labor are male, right? So it's a big percentage for boys, right, compared to girls. So all of these issues, they usually tie up together.
I would be very interested in having those statistics. I would like to go back a little bit and say that I don't think we should be talking about toxic masculinity was a real thing. It's a misandrist phrase. So if we want to talk about men having internalized misandry, then maybe we can come up with a different phrase that means that specific thing, instead of using a feminist phrase which means, and you should go and you should cry about your feelings, only we won't listen, and it's all your fault and everything is your fault and only you can do anything about it and it has nothing to do with us. So
Yeah, that's
we
that's
have to
why
be
that's why I think it's more of internalized misandry. Because okay, here's the thing: if we take women's gender roles and women who internalize them, and we call that internalized misogyny, shouldn't we also say that men who internalize their restrictive gender roles, and I mean specifically the restrictive one. I don't mind, a guy saying that he wants to be nice to his family and protect them. I mean like the really restrictive ones, boys can only like blue and girls can only like pink and that other rubbish. So I feel like if we call internalized gender roles for women as internalized misogyny, we should also like call internalized gender roles for men as internalized misandry, right? The only issue is where me and other feminists differ is that they view gender roles as something that's beneficiary to men, but extremely bad for women, which is why they feel like if men internalize their roles, it means it's good for men because men get to, be the so-called like man of the house and that kind of thing, which honestly doesn't even help, to be honest. So that's where it comes from, right? But if you actually look at these roles, like if anything they're more harmful towards men. Like it's not a coincidence that men still work more hours than women and get less consumer spending. They're more likely to be homeless, more likely to die in war, that kind of thing. Those are all result of male gender roles.
But I would like to add that I do
something-
think that the term toxic masculinity is not entirely of a like invalid concept. I do think that that concept does have some merits, and the main sufferers of toxic masculinity tend to actually be TERFs, ironically speaking, because the idea of like being super masculine, rejecting femininity, and thinking that like you have to be this manly, otherwise it's not good, right? And that femininity is like bad. That seems to be far more common with radical feminists than with the general male population. But I will also say that there are some ideas that I would consider to be toxic masculinity, where it's like restricting people. Say like a lot of men say like, no, I can't do that just because it's unmanly, right? And they don't have another reason. Like good reason would be, I don't want to do that because I don't want to. That's a good reason. But it's like, oh, I can't do that because that's unmanly. And I do think that that's like something that is toxic masculinity. I do think that it applies to a lot of ideas. But I think it's very differently than how it's usually portrayed, which is very unfortunate because I do think it's a useful term.
I agree with Jay Weil here about the term of toxic masculinity, but something that came up in this conversation is very interesting. Is like so there is this sexist way that almost everyone in society and feminists including see masculinity and femininity. So the feminist movement, when it started and when it started to try and like bring equality to men and women, they tried to bring like every position of women to be like they try to put women on every position of men, and through that they essentially try to I don't want to say make women into men, but like to essentially like make like wait, I just need to explain it like properly. Like in order to empower women, they try to like bring onto women like male or masculine traits. And I think with this reasoning, I'm not saying that that wasn't important or good or anything. I think that was important, But I think that what they forgot to do, or not forgot to do, what they I think this kind of this kind of led to a sort of thought that like male or masculine gender roles are the standard, and like feminine gender roles are just a variation.
To be
And I
honest,
think
I don't think that they've ever really like super fought for equality. I think they thought to grab a bunch of the things that men have, but I don't think they've ever fought for equality in the sense that they've argued for women digging ditches and things like that. By the way, what about Taz has been waiting very, very patiently to talk about his.
oh, sorry.
May I just like comment on your point before that? Is that okay?
To be honest, we're getting really off topic, and we probably should just go straight back onto family courts. What about Taz? Would you be able to tell us some of your story? Is that possible, or would you?
Well, a thumbnail that I mean, I am a divorcee, and ironically, the family court system we're all talking about didn't have very much to do with that action. My divorce was amicably mediated, and the legal part was just some paperwork. But I have been called to family court as a defendant. And without going into very much detail, I lost that case before I ever stepped in there, because, you know, with no discussion yet here about this, but at least in the States, the family court system is an amalgam of both criminal and civil law, which, at least according to how the judiciary was originally set up, were never supposed to be interconnected. They were always supposed to be kept separate as tort and criminal prosecution. But, you know, because of the fact that they said, well, we'll just put them together and see how that works out, that's where you get these discussions about continuing education from prosecutors, advising divorce attorneys to file, have their clients file restraining orders as part of the civil proceedings of the divorce rather than in criminal court. Because in criminal court, if it doesn't have merit, then in criminal court it gets dropped. But the good news for the client is that it'll remain part of the court record in civil court. It's I'm hearing in this discussion a lot of speculation and recommendations and ideas about how to rescue the family court system. But I think it deserves consideration, what the family court system was enacted for. Okay. And it was enacted publicly to deal with family issues. Behind closed doors, it was designed specifically to eradicate the traditional family, and it has worked. It has been effective. In my own case, one thing it taught me was that my number one job for the rest of my life is to make sure that I'm never in the hands of those people again under any circumstances. And what that means is that I will avoid the eye of the family court system by any means necessary. And if that means that I have to live out and die alone, then that's what I'm going to do. Okay, that's how bad it is when you actually go through it. So, like I said, all this speculation and all these ideas to reform and reconstruct the family court system is using the master's tools to dismantle the master's house. Okay, it can't be done. It's beyond recovery. Okay? And the only sensible thing to do is walk away, unless and until all of that is done away with. Okay, because there's anything, for example, that Jay Willie was talking about to reform and re-image that system legally. I don't know if you've ever even been an observer in a court proceeding in family court, but basically, any family lawyer worth his salt can take any of the things being recommended and turn them and use them to destroy a man. Now, the person who might have been a guest here, but it looks like he's not going to be able to make it. I've heard from him separately in other conversations about what that's really like, and I myself have been an observer in family court proceedings, and I can tell you that there is no legal recourse to correct the family court system. It is impossible by definition. It can't be done.
The family court system is if the purpose of family court system is to destroy marriage in the traditional family, then the solution to the status quo is to support the marriage in the traditional family by measuring the marriage laws in a way that would benefit both men and women, and also to do away with family court system altogether, because that is like no point to having a separate court for family court. Why does that even make sense? It's not even criminal court, because like court proceeding when it comes to contract and marriage is and should be a contract. It should just be changed, right? Should follow any other court proceedings. A breach of contract is considered generally like a criminal procedure, right? And that is what it should be. But put back in the idea of family court can just as well be abolished because if its only purpose is to destroy marriage, then there's no reason to even have it. Like marriage
there never was, if the purpose was to maintain or at least preserve the traditional family. But again, it wasn't set up for that. It was set up to take it apart.
Exactly.
Which is why we're having so many issues. Which is, I think, like I'm very. Of course, everybody knows I'm probably a little bit more right leaning than left leaning, but I think that that's probably why we're having the issues that we're having today, is because they're trying to get fathers out of their kids' lives, because it's been scientifically proven that when there's more father or paternal involvement, unless there are cases of, like, of course, abuse, sexual abuse, like any sort of cases of abuse where the guy's a monster, then absolutely the mother is safer taking the kid out of that man's life. However, if he's a good man and he treats those kids well, why are you doing this? Why are you keeping him out of his life? That's super damaging. That can be mentally damaging for him. That could be mentally damaging for you as well, because that's possibly why, women are statistically more likely to abuse their children, is because of the fact that they think that everything is on them, and it's not. It shouldn't be. The guys, guys have like paternal and parental instincts. They do. They're very nurturing. They're very fascinating. They're super, super awesome.
That's so true. That is absolutely true, especially when it comes to me. But yeah, this is all correct, and this is the reason why we need to throw away family court altogether, and we need to just make sure marriage is legally altered to benefit both sexes, and to fix no-fault divorce, either get rid of it or to change the divorce, right? Which I explained earlier about how that should be done. and to make sure that both genders actually have obligation towards one another, and to solidify that marriage is fundamentally to do with the family, right? And a breach of marriage contract should be considered any other breach of contracts. Like when you, for example, hire someone to do something, they sign a contract. I'm going to do this for this amount of money, okay? And then you do it, right? And if no one breaks that, you go to court for it because it's illegal. And I think the breaking breaking a marriage agreement should also be proceeded in the same way, right? And the same thing when you abuse someone, that's a crime, right? When you attack someone on the street, that's a crime. There's no reason to separate them. Well, there is a reason. The reason is to destroy the family through the family court system. That's the reason why it should be done away with altogether. So therefore, we should change marriage. And also, like, if people don't like the new change marriage, which is good, like I want to change marriage, you can't have an abortion when you're married. And if you do anyway, that means immediately abortion, no strings attached afterwards, and even compensation for the man, right? But therefore, I will say, like, if you really want to be able to do stuff like that when you're married, then you should have the wonderful options of civil union. That's why it's important. That thing should be brought back. If you don't want marriage with less obligation, you can go ahead and do it with a civil union. But marriage should be redefined to fit the purpose of a family, and to help both genders should have the rights and obligations. And this actually includes homosexual couples actually also deserve to have the same rights when it comes to family and marriage as heterosexual couples. Currently, if you're a gay man, if you are less, it's many concepts. If you are a gay couple, you actually have more rights than a man and a straight couple when you get married. And I want to extend that marital right to all couples.
I have something to say. I don't know if anyone has thought about this or mentioned it yet, but it's slightly related to the topic of family court and divorce court. Now, here's the thing, right? We all know that domestic violence against men happens, and by this I mean specifically intimate partner violence. We all know it occurs, and we all know that men in general are pretty unlikely to report it. But one thing that that makes men to stay with abusive women, or maybe sometimes even abusive men, is because of the family court. And I'll explain how, right? So let's say, for example, you're a man and you have like 2 children and you have an abusive wife. She tells you that she's going to hit you, and if you hit her back, or if you try and get divorced from her, or if you tell anyone, she's going to divorce you, and she's going to automatically be given the kids. Because in many countries, especially in Muslim countries, the woman automatically gets the child, and they have very, very lax definitions of child abuse. Their child abuse is quite legal. Child abuse in terms of, like spanking and belting and that kind of thing. Not like the serious child abuse, but it's still allowed in some extent, right? So she tells the guy, if you tell me that you're going to leave me or you're going to call the cops or anything, I'm going to divorce you, and then I'm going to get the children, and you're never going to see them again, right? So this leads to him putting up with the abuse. This leads to him having mental health issues because of how trapped he feels. And it's quite sad because I'm currently doing some research for my university on the topic of intimate partner violence against men in Kenya. And many men here, they feel like there is institutional sexism against men, okay? Or institutional misandry against men, right? Because they feel like they have nowhere to go. Because if they go to the police, I'll even send you a case study about this if anyone is interested. They feel like if they go to the police, or even when they do go to the police mock them and tell them to go away. If they go to their family members will mock them. And if they go to their friends will also mock them. There's a hotline, but it seldom works. So abused men have nowhere to go, and they still need to take care of their kids, of course. So that's another thing that leads to men staying in abusive relationships, especially married men or men with children.
I think when it comes to abuse in relationships, it's a very complicated situation because, as you already pointed out, one, you've got she can threaten to lie, or police, and then in general, you have there are a lot of. I'm not saying people don't believe that women can't hurt men, but a lot of people will, of course, still laugh at that or find that implausible, or just tell you to man up, or something else. And I mean, I think even if you try to accuse, I know people say I'm horrible for this, maybe, I don't know. But even when it comes to child abuse, it's hard to really pin that on women. Most of the cases where you see people accused of child abuse is men more than it usually is women. And the reason is we also have a big problem, and it's true that we have this problem where people will, if a kid's genuinely getting abused by their mother sometimes, they will just sort of knock it off and be like, oh, you're just getting disciplined by your mom. She's just disciplining you. You're just a baby and stuff. And so we've got a problem there too. And then another thing you have to look at as well is circumstances. Financially, a guy may not want to leave, which is a whole nother reason. Because if they divorce the wife, suddenly they lose the money. Their kids, they can't afford certain things for their kids, like college or just basic living expenses or what else not. That might be another reason. And then another thing is, too, when they're in the court, again, previously said by other people, it's so easy for someone to accuse them or make false accusations or to pull up honestly anything against them. And at least here in the States, we have VAWA. I mean, there's international VAWA too, which affects some countries, but there's VAWA, and that allows loopholes to make it that any case can basically be turned into a criminal case. And the father in prison, all they have to do is say the word like that. Oh, he hit me. Oh, he did this. They make fake claims that their kids got hurt. And, and the kids too and it's understandable why they do this, that kids are limited in talking in court. It's understandable why they do that. It's traumatic to kids. Family court's really hard and stuff. But, in some ways, it's also a crutch in the fact that the kids might be telling the truth about something, and now they don't
Can I say
get to
something?
Go for it.
Which is why I actually have an idea whenever it comes to kids, giving kids some rights, whenever it comes to, family court. I actually think that if a child is over the age of 13, that child at that point should be able to make a decision on who he or she wants to live on, which parent they want to
I think
live
that's
with.
already there. I think that's
Well-
already there, but it's for 16, not 13. I believe
Well-
so.
It
Yeah.
also varies from country to country. I think Sweden is earlier than 16.
Well, I think the age should be lowered then, because at 13 you can kind of get a gauge of who you feel safer with. I think it should be lowered so that way the safety of the child is better off.
And also the child should be able
And
to
that should be stressed, and because of that rule, I think that rule should be stressed more. They should definitely take the kids word into account a lot more when making decisions, because as much as people want to say, kids are liars and all that, they're really not. They're actually more honest than adults half the time. So
Yeah, and that's the other thing too, is there's so many court cases now where a few times kids do speak, if they speak against one parent or other, they try to claim it's manipulation. Oh, they manipulate them to say that. It's
Yeah,
at that
I
point,
do
both
like.
parents are just hurting their kids. When you claim the kids being manipulated by one parent or another, at that point, you're just both hurting your kids and you're both being dumb.
I do like the idea of kids being able to feed into the thing about with which parent they'd like to stay with, though that does bring up like Fred Hayward's problem, if you remember from the red pill last week.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. His mom
Yeah.
was giving him too much candy.
Yeah. For
That
people who haven't seen the red pill, who are listening on YouTube, Fred Hayward's son was his ex-wife tried to turn his son against him by giving him loads of sweets and letting him watch TV all the time, and he'd be trying to diet the boy on on his time that he had with him, but that really kind of made it worse because who would you rather stay with, the parent who wants you to diet all the time, or the parent who gives you brownies and lets you watch TV? It's very simple maths there, that he went with like the mother a lot of the time, and
yeah, that's
and
That's not
the
exclusively.
courts then banned him weighing the kid.
yeah, true.
Carry on.
That's why I was thinking it is a bit risky to have like a young child make that final call, because also if you consider the fact that men in general work more hours than women and that kind of thing, and women in general spend like a lot of time with their children, and like kids are really close to their mom, so they might not that the father is bad, but they just might say, oh, I want to stay with mommy, or oh, I want to stay with daddy, based on nothing other than how they feel in the moment. Kids are, they are intelligent, she's absolutely right, but they're just like what he said, they're just going to pick what parents seems fun in quotes, and that kind of thing. So it will start a thing where like the parents will be trying to bribe their children into staying with them. My parents have been divorced, so I kind of know what that feels like. It's not pretty, right? So what I think is that children should be able to give a testimony on how they are treated, that way, because here's the thing, I wouldn't want an abusive mother to just not be able to see her kids. I'd want her to at least serve some maybe jail time or something, especially if the abuse is really severe, right? So the children should be able to like give a testimony, you know and from there, if they find out that a parent is being abusive, they can catch them, rather than just saying, make the child like make the decision. Also puts a huge amount of pressure on the kids,
Yeah, because then the parents will start guilting the kids, saying, "Oh, you don't love me. You don't really love me because you didn't go with me. You love your no good, dirty other parent who's mean, and who that sort of thing." It's like depending on the child's age, really. Like, I mean, I've known guys who've had abusive ex-wives, and the abusive wife will turn the kids against him, and it eventually becomes dad is just the guy who gives them some extra Christmas presents, and they don't really care about him at all. They don't really. He doesn't mean anything to them. He's just this guy. He's Uncle Dad is the like the favorite phrase that we had last week as well.
It's not even Uncle Dad. They just when I don't have personal experience with this, but I have friends who have dealt with this. When you take away and you turn the kid away from either or parent, they usually do it in the most malicious intention. And it's just, they just try to make you absolutely hate the person, to be honest. I mean, it's absolutely terrible. I have a friend, I don't know if I can give super specifics, but I have a friend who had a stepfather who died recently. And the stepfather had a previous marriage where he had 2 daughters. And the wife turned the daughters against him, and they showed up for a funeral like only for 5 minutes to see him. They absolutely hate his guts. They didn't want to be there.
They what? Sorry.
They didn't want to be at the funeral of their father because they couldn't stand
That's
him.
horrible.
Like, because the mom turned him against him, even though he had been trying so hard to fight for him. And then at some point, he finally just gave up because he realized how hard he fought was a good.
Yeah, those are good subjects. What about Taz? Maybe we could talk about those a little bit on the stream. Like, I think we've gone through the child support debt thing.
Well, I just had to add something to what Kate said before, which is very interesting, and really happy she brought that up. And then she basically mentioned that that in many Islamic countries, the child automatically go with the mother, right? A very interesting example is that usually in those countries, if they're not secular, what tend to occur is that what give grounds for divorce in those countries tend to be if the man is like unable to financially support a family, like basically disabled, right, or something like that, right? And that's kind of like a way of just saying that if he can't work, then he's like not good enough to be a parent, if that makes sense. So I thought that might have been relevant to an earlier statement, which is very important to bring up. Because I actually did not know that they were given to the mothers immediately in those countries. I actually didn't know it. I'm really happy that I was told now today.
Okay, I think we've gotten to a point where we've covered pretty much the whole topic. So I'm going to end the stream and edit it.
I do actually have one thing else that is important to mention. I think we didn't mention, and that is how child support is completely ruining men. It's because at least in the United States, what happened if he can't pay child support is that they basically make it harder for him to do it in the future by taking away the passport and the driver's license, which he often need to work, and also send him to jail if he doesn't, which means you have a criminal record. So rather than to have that you're behind with child support, it also means that you go to prison and you also need to get a job again to pay the same amount of money, right? And in that regard, you also have no passport and no driver's license and a criminal record, just because you didn't have to pay child support, just because you couldn't pay child support in the past, right? So therefore, how are you going to do it now with those things laying on your back? You can't get an education if you're behind with that because you can't afford it, And that is like proof that these child support laws are exclusively meant to funnel the industry.
Screw men royally.
Well, the other issue to that too.
Yeah.
The other issue to that too is, and Blue and I know this guy, and he's working on trying to fix this a little bit, which is another big problem, is you cannot change the amount you have to pay in child support unless you go through the court system to do so. And that could take ages. So if you suddenly lost your job, you can change the amount of child support you need to pay based on your circumstance, but you have to go through like practically like a 4-month, 5-month like court, like DA's off and all of that kind of stuff to get through it. It's absurd, and it'll take, sometimes it takes people years to change their child support. By then they may have found a job. And so we have this issue where people are ending up in that situation too, because we aren't making it easy for guys to be able to change their amount of child support.
And another messed up thing is that the courts make money off of it, so they've got an impetus to basically charge you as much as possible. But I don't know the ins and outs about it.
That explains why you basically they're making it harder for you to pay child support if you miss it once, just because the court make more money if you have to go through the court and go to prison. It's also good for the good, quote unquote. It's also beneficial for the industry of prison industrial complex, as well as it just gives the court more money basically, right? And that's why it make it deliberately harder. And one way of combating that for most men is to be able to become dual citizens. I think that will be the best way of dealing with this, because if you have a family court and they want to take your passport, and therefore you better make sure you have 2 passports, so that you go to a different country. That's the only way you can escape this. Otherwise, you're going to go to jail and then you probably get raped and then you would never be able to get out of this. You will be in jail, like on and off, and not be able to get a job. You would be literally basically a slave, more or less, for
I
like
don't know if that'd
decades.
work in today's modern world though, because so many countries can speak together and they can just locate you on the most abandoned island in the world at this point and put you in jail. So even dual
Yeah.
citizenship won't work. You want to be.
You're right. This discussion is, making plans to slay a hydra. I mean, there is no, brand new clever idea that these people haven't already thought of and accounted for, and have not already figured out how to turn against families. I mean, really, this is, we're, like I said, we're looking to, pick a head of the hydra, cut it off, and then get surprised when two more spring up in its place. Honestly, I am pretty sure that, that we don't have a legal reform solution here.
If the law
I
can't be
mean,
changed, then the solution is basically to hope for the country's legal structure, social structure to collapse, like with the Western Roman Empire, which is actually kind of a viable solution in my opinion, because if you destroy the family, you destroy society.
I'm ready if you are.
Oh yeah, I'm all like.
I've been ready. I've been ready for this crap. I've been ready for the tables to turn. Let's go.
Exactly, and that's what the best way to do is for people to have their own families, their own nuclear family, and then have them in a way, which is very easy to be able to sustain a collapse. Which is, I'm not really saying that I think
Here's the thing, though.
may not happen. That's what I'm doing to be able to endure.
Here's what doesn't make any sense to me is why do, more specifically, why do like toxic women constantly not necessarily toxic women, but why does the family court system always think that women are like these pure, innocent, like angelic creatures? They can do no harm, they can do no wrong, when statistically they actually do more harm than men do.
Yeah.
Not saying that doesn't
Women are
exist.
wonderful.
Very simply,
due
very
to
simply,
the fact that we have a lot of there's a lot of bias towards women, gynocentrism. You can go on 100 things with that.
Women are wonderful effect.
Yeah. Long story short, the answer to your question is that if they stop doing that, then they will lose power and influence and money. So they are not going to stop doing that. Not now, not ever.
I've never seen myself, because I mean, for me, in some ways I've struggled, like with my own femininity, because, for a very long time, I was especially by, my grandmother, she was, she always taught me that, women are the weaker vessels and all that. But my dad never raised me that way. He never saw like womanhood as weak. He never saw that, and he never wanted me to feel that way. He never wanted me to feel like because I was a woman I couldn't do anything. And
Adam's girl.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. There is real power in being a supposed victim, especially in today's society, but always. That's how it's always been, So it's not that like women aren't strong, or that, women aren't sensible. We've always been, as strong and as sensible as men, or at least mentally. But there is a lot of power in being like, oh, I'm this helpless victim. Please take care of me, And that's, the funny thing is, and this is a little bit of funny thing, and I don't think that they're doing it intentionally, but a lot of feminists, they seem to actually kind of do the same things as the conservatives, right? Because the conservatives, they're like, oh, women are small and weak and men need to like defend them and take care of them. And then the feminists are like, oh,
Which there's
women are
nothing wrong
small.
with that, of course.
Yeah, exactly, by the way. And then like the what's it called? Like the feminists are like, women are small and weak, not because we're naturally like that. No, it's all because of the mythical patriarchy that's just keeping every single woman down. If a woman can't, or chooses to do something instead of this other thing, it's because of the patriarchy. It can never just be because, she makes her own decision. Like if a woman chooses to like go into nursing instead of computer science, it's because of the mythical patriarchy.
No,
Basically, women
it's
can't
by
be.
choice.
Exactly, yeah. So basically, women can't be held accountable for their own actions, not because we're weak, but because of the mythical patriarchy. So the government needs to like protect us and provide for us and do all the same thing. It's just changing one person with another or one entity
I
with
think it's
another.
simple projection.
So
I think it's honestly, you know what I think? I think
Mhm.
I think I think toxic, the bad parts of like what toxic feminism, that's what I'm going to say, toxic feminism, not real OG feminism. I think that toxic feminism is portraying classic textbook psychology, some like signs of projection, signs, speech, rhetoric, all of it. I think it's classic projection. They're projecting the same things onto men that was projected onto us for such a long time, and it's hurting us, but it's also hurting men as well. It like we as a society, because we as a society are like cutting, like we're bleeding, and there needs to be some healing. We're bleeding.
Exactly. So like, what I often hear from a lot of feminist groups is that actual gender equality is not something that we need to have right now because women are just too disadvantaged. So like just basically treating us how you treat a guy in terms of like legally, um, is not viable, right? So like let me give you an example. I saw this article written by this feminist. She was basically saying that women should be given laxer sentences when it comes to the courts, which they already are, by the way. Women
Last
are
time I
not being
checked, men statistically are 64% longer prison sentences than women do.
I hate to cut
exactly,
you off, but we are
Yeah.
getting a little off topic, and
That's
so
Have you? Sorry, I thought you guys had stopped the stream, so I was just talking about like other stuff. Sorry about
it's
sorry
fine.
about that.
Thank you everyone for coming. This is the Friday chat stream of the Men's Humans Rights Discord, or Men Are Human Discord. We are here every Friday, 5 o'clock UK time, 11 a.m. Central, 5 o'clock p.m. UK time. If you have any topics you want us to talk about, you can always text Men Are Human, Blue Orange, myself. We will see you all next week. This has been an amazing chat.